Several weeks after the class design was supposed to be complete and the development team was supposed to be into full swing on tuning abilities, there is still a feeling of incompleteness about most specs and reportedly serious problems in several. Blizzard have had to announce that these issues will not now be addressed until patch 8.1 at the earliest. So how did we get into this mess? Now let's be clear what I'm talking about here, or more specifically what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about aspects of class design that we may not like. There are a number of design decisions that I disagree with, but I'm not talking about the situations that I don't like and I'm just assuming need to be fixed, or even the community at wide. I'm talking about the situation that even the class designers themselves are not content with. Now, I follow the design decisions very closely for my spec, and I know how the design philosophies have changed and changed again over the last 6 months. So let's go through a bit of a timeline of class design for the battle for Azeroth. So going back to Legion, that brought with it 2 major developments in class design. 1, the artifact weapon system with new and amended core abilities, and 2, massive redesigns to quite a lot of the specs. 2 of the most senior people to be most directly responsible for many of the brain farts that somehow bled into the design were moved from World of Warcraft at the start of Legion, so we are thankfully without their interference now. Although we are in a mess in terms of being unready for the expansion, the work that the class designers themselves have done in dealing with the inherited chaos is a big improvement on Legion. At and just after the time of BlizzCon, Blizzard came out with a number of design philosophy statements. 1. The artifact traits were designed to sit on top of our more baseline abilities. Well, while this may have been the intention, the traits and Legion redesigns were clearly interwoven. The reason is probably obvious enough. With deadlines for class design and a lot of work needed by that time for Legion, corners were cut and the 2 strands of class design, which were supposed to be separate, became fused together. Regardless of the truth as to the cause, it was obvious to everyone that removing the traits would necessitate another major revamp of specs. Obvious to everyone except Blizzard, it seemed. Class buffs were announced. Each class would get a unique buff in order that they be made to feel special. Blizzard announced that they wanted a reason to take an otherwise absent class, without considering who would be the best player. The days of bring the player not the class were reversed some time ago, but it is now forcibly official. However, many of the initial class buffs were very weak, with some having a benefit in taking multiple of them, while others would only need 1. 3. Blizzard insisted that no 2 classes have the same ability. All abilities had to be unique. And 4, a downtime quota was introduced to give people time to look around while doing their rotation, apparently. This philosophy seems to have been scaled back a little now, but has not been completely abandoned. Each of these 4 design philosophies would require a massive amount of development time to implement, as they often pulled against each other. But Blizzard underestimated that on every level. The end result is that talent trees needed emergency redesigns, the class buff system was massively scaled back, with the completely reverse official statement now being that they make classes feel less special, somehow. And finally, what would otherwise appear to be identical abilities were made different by randomly placing one on the global cooldown and another off it. It used to be the case that the official release date for an expansion came 2 months before release. This was changed for Legion when they announced it 4 months ahead. It could be argued that this was within them because they spent longer on Legion development than any other expansion, with it being developed in parallel with Warlords of Draenor. However, Battle for Azeroth only began development with the release of Legion, so was it a mistake to announce the release date so early? They had already announced that 21st of September would be the latest it released, because you need to do that in order to sell pre-orders. And they wanted to sell pre-orders to get people back in at the start of 2018 because there would be no new Legion content now. They made the allied races available if you pre-ordered, and so it was a way of introducing pseudo-content. But they didn't have to announce the actual release date so early. There are many systems in an expansion, and class design is only one of them. However, it's also the most important. If people aren't happy with how their class plays, they aren't happy with the game. Some people raid, but others do not. Some people do dungeons, others won't. Same with the other features like islands, pet battles, arenas, battlegrounds, and so on. So making a mess of one of these doesn't turn off your entire player base, in the same way that messy class design will. Should Blizzard have seen the mess they were facing earlier and added a few more weeks onto the release date? Now, just as with open alphas and betas, there are dedicated forum areas for people with access to post feedback and discussions. However, in stark contrast to previous testing cycles, there were hardly any developer responses and next to no discussions. The vast majority of the very few blue posts that do exist are just statements of either what is coming up or a justification for certain philosophies. There is little to no follow-up. However, in previous cycles, including Legion, the developers actively took part in the discussions. That is to say, they directly responded to comments and then followed up if something sensible was said in reply. Now we have almost deafening silence, and the game director saying they'd rather we just use Twitter, where of course discussions do not naturally form and we're restricted to a short paragraph of monosyllabic grunts by comparison. The end result has been that the myriad of posts that have been largely between people who have no idea about the abilities they are spending 500 words blathering about, and a ridiculous number of false statements have been made and perpetuated. All it would have taken is a developer to call out these inaccuracies, and much more fruitful discussion could have taken place. There has simply been no direction given to the slavering masses whose detailed analysis of a class ultimately boils down to, "Ooh, shiny," or "me no like." So what could Blizzard have done differently? Well, the revamp of specs was unavoidable. Actually thinking that the traits weren't an important part of the specs gameplay was embarrassing, but there was nothing that could be done about it once Alpha opened up. Redesigning was priority number one. They abandoned the idea of class buffs for all, but perhaps they would have done better to abandon the entire concept. Maybe they left what we have in because they didn't want to look foolish by announcing something at BlizzCon that they didn't later deliver on. This did them no favours when it happened with Warlords. But now we have a situation where some classes will need to be taken by min-maxing groups, being particularly damaged for Mythic Plus Dungeoneers and Mythic Raiders, with the classes without being forced further out to the periphery of selection. They could have shared them out a bit so that each class buff or debuff was actually taken by two classes. It would mean needing 6 of them instead of 5, but that wouldn't have been difficult. But then they fall foul of their precious uniqueness. Which brings me on to that philosophy. When you have 36 specs and you want them all to play very differently, you introduce several problems, which I'll be talking about in a separate video next week. But one major problem is that you simply can't have unique abilities. It's not even essential that all abilities be unique. After all specs have auto attack. That isn't unique. We can all jump, only demon hunters get a unique take on that. Melee all get a 15-second melee range interrupt, with only a couple of variations on that theme. In this pursuit of uniqueness, we end up with some classes not having the tools that make certain aspects of the game trivial for others. We also end up with Blizzard having to come up with convoluted logic as to why two clearly identical abilities are different based on one being on the global cooldown and the other off it, or one is baseline but the other's a talent. This one philosophy having been abandoned early on would have removed the ties from the hands of the class designers, and they would have had free rein to just make the specs work. And here we are with some specs unfinished and told that they won't be finished anytime soon. And although people are focusing on the Battle for Azeroth release, the class design has to be done for the pre-expansion patch. That's when we change the Legion specs to the BFA ones. And that's less than a month away. Of course, tuning will take place long after that, and Blizzard have always planned it that way. But the toolkits were already supposed to be in place a few weeks ago. There should have been some management of the forums. I don't expect the developers themselves to have to read every post pertaining to the specs they're working on, but I do expect a system whereby certain things will be pointed out to them that they could respond to in order to shine a light on fruitful areas of discussion or to squash some of the nonsense being spouted. If the community managers lack the expertise to do this, then they should have found knowledgeable players of the spec who would agree to read all the relevant posts to do it for them. However, we are now where we are. We know from Legion that Blizzard are prepared to make significant changes to both talents and baseline abilities after the expansion has gone live, so there's a little hope. The problem is that many people are not tied to a particular spec, and they like to think about choosing a main some weeks before launch. This is why there are now emerging a host of videos on how to choose a main for Battle for Azeroth. Unfortunately, the players are just not being given the information they need for a long-term decision. So I hope you found this discussion interesting. If you did, please give it a like and comment below, it really does help. Subscribe and click the bell icon for notifications of more content, and share with others who may also be interested. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.